In this 5-part video series, we're counting down our top 5 biggest what-ifs in Toronto Raptors history. In the last video, we discussed our 5th picks for the biggest what-if. If you haven't seen it, please go check that out before watching this episode. Because in today's video, we'll be diving into our 4th pick for the biggest what-if in franchise history. So without further ado, let's get into it.
All right, so let's go with our top 4 pick. Emmanuel, you started off this round.
With the 4th pick in the 2003 NBA draft, the Toronto Raptors select Dwayne Wade from Marquette University.
I think the Raptors not selecting Dwayne Wade at that number 4 pick and then taking Chris Bosh and then Wade going 5 to Miami. To me, that's such a huge what if, because as we know, Wade was the better player. Wade's a Hall of Famer. And I think Wade being drafted at that time when Vince was kind of like, I want out and some funny business going on and stuff. I think you bring in Dwayne Wade, who people forget coming out of college, coming out of Marquette, was a point guard. So him and Vince couldn't play together. No, he was a point guard in college. And he went in that tournament, bust up the tournament, and just finished his last game in the tournament with a triple-double. I think he had like 2 triple-doubles in that tournament. So he was an all-around guy. He came in the league and became a scorer, but initially they brought him in to be like a point guard type player. So you put him alongside with Vince. I think Vince stays. I think he doesn't demand to leave because we know that before Rob Babcock pulled the trade, Vince went back and said, okay, I don't want to be traded anymore. So if you get Wade in there, like there's no way in my mind that Vince leaves. I think he stays. We have a dominant wing duo. We basically prevent the Heatles from ever forming, right? And Wade and LeBron became an amazing perimeter duo combination that rivaled Jordan and Pippen. After Jordan and Pippen, the conventional wisdom was you got a good wing, get a big. Got a good wing, get a big. That was the thinking. That's why we wanted Bosh. We already got Vince. We already got a wing player. Let's get a big to go with him. But Jordan and Pippen before that, LeBron and Wade after that, KD and Steph after that, like we started to see that it doesn't have to be a big man and wing combo. Just get 2 dominant wings. That's what we could have had if we had drafted Dwayne Wade. And Bosh did nothing for us. He did nothing for us and he left. and he did nothing for us. We got to the playoffs, didn't win a game. Wade would have been a better player and who knows what could have happened if we had Wade and Vince Carter. And if Vince still left. Even if Vince left, we still would have had Wade, who was a better player than Vince and a better player than Bosh, to kind of like hang our franchise on. But when Vince left, we hung it on Bosh. A nice player, but not a franchise guy, not a guy that could carry a team by himself, right? Where Wade was. So that's my pick for number 4.
That was an interesting pick, passing up on Dwayne Wade and picking Bosh. Let's go, Justin. What was your top 4 what if?
People are like, Isaiah's not here, Isaiah's not running it. Well, I don't want to be here.
So John's out, Isaiah's out. Who's next out the door?
To see someone every day, to have dialogue with them, and then all of a sudden, boom, it's not there that day. It messed me up. I'm not going to lie.
My 4th one was Damon Stoudemire leaving. Damon only, played 3 years for us. He regretted leaving. He said it plenty of times afterwards. And, he was the first Raptor that had the key to the city. The Mighty Mouse commercials. We built everything around this guy. He nearly averaged 20 and 10 as a Raptor. I mean, these are for a 5'10" point guard. This is just phenomenal numbers. He had they would have built everything around him. And, he wanted to get out of the city. He wanted to go to greener pastures, and he wasn't patient. And it's just like, you wonder, I felt like that really slowed us down a bit because you drafted this guy who ended up being great. Isaiah Thomas handpicks, and he ends up being a great player, and he doesn't even stick around. And then you look at it, okay, we got Alvin Williams in the trade. I know to a lot of people, they're diehard Alvin Williams fans because he played so hard every night and all of that. I'm not saying he did it, but there's no look at the numbers. There's absolutely no comparison. The second Damon left Toronto, his scoring immediately dipped. He averaged 12 points a game the following season when he went to Portland. Why? He played a completely different role on a talented team. He was never able to get back up to that level. All throughout his career, he averaged 12, 13 points in Portland. And then you look at what we got back in Alvin. His career high as a Raptors was 13 points a game. You know, he was averaging single digits for the first couple of years. So there's really no comparison in that sense, right? He brought you grit and toughness, but stats wise, you know, you're talking about a guy you really could have built a team around, and you really would have liked to have seen what could happen if he'd stayed. And you know, it was heartbreaking for me as a fan to have to go through that, and it took us a while before we were able to get that real next phase of Toronto basketball.
Like you talk about Alvin Williams, I mean, Alvin Williams did the best that he could with what, you know, he was given in terms of his skill set. But let's not forget that Kenny Anderson was the focal point, right, of that trade. And Kenny Anderson said he's not coming here, right? Like Kenny Anderson was the guy that they wanted for Damon Stoudemire. He said, I'm not going to Toronto. I'm not doing it, right? So Alvin Williams was the only one who showed up. So I give him respect for that. I mean, obviously he had no choice who was Alvin Williams at the time, but still, I'm just saying it's not like that was the focus. The focus wasn't, hey, we're going to trade Damon Stoudemire Rookie of the Year for Alvin Williams. We wanted Kenny Anderson, but the guy said no, he wasn't showing up, right? So
Yeah, Anderson, like I was such a huge fan of Kenny Anderson when he was in college. And this guy's from New York, and he's like, he's not coming to Toronto like he was going to Afghanistan or something like that. Like that's how these guys were acting back in those days. Damon is the best point guard this franchise has ever had. Kyle Lowry is the best Raptor point guard. So in a Raptor uniform, Kyle Lowry, what he did, he's number one before anybody gets mad at me. But in terms of talent, point guard, Damon was like he was phenomenal in the Raptor jersey. And like you said, Justin, once he left, it was never the same.
Abby, what was your top 4 what if?
With the 9th pick in the 1997 NBA draft, the Toronto Raptors select Tracy McGrady from Mount Zion Christian Academy. That's the question I was supposed to ask, I think.
McGrady is a Hall of Famer. He was an all-star. He blew up. He became a superstar the second he left. And so imagine if he had stayed and we had the McGrady who was averaging like 26 points a game with Vince Carter who was averaging like that same amount. Imagine those two, what the team could have done. Look how close we got in, I think it was the 2001 playoffs when we lost to the Sixers. Imagine if we had Tracy McGrady. We're definitely winning that series. I think we're probably beating the Bucks as well, and who knows? And so McGrady not staying, I think, is a massive what if that I think a lot of people agree with. I don't necessarily know if the McGrady we saw in Orlando, is that what we would have seen in Toronto if he had stayed? That I don't know. I was looking at the stats, and I think he went from 15 points a game in his 3rd season with the Raptors. He immediately jumped to 26.8. So basically, he immediately went from 15 to 27 points a game the second he left. And I don't know, Vince in that same year when McGrady was averaging 15, Vince was averaging 25. So maybe there was a reason. Maybe that's connected. Maybe it's not a coincidence that McGrady wasn't able to average as much as he did because he was playing next to Vince. And so that's the only thing that I'm a little bit unsure of. It kind of reminds me of James Harden. James Harden went from 13 points a game with OKC to like 25 the second he went to Houston. And so maybe McGrady needed that change in environment to become the superstar that he did. Either way, he was still good even with the Raptors. And so if he had stayed, I still think he would have made the team much better. And so that is why I went with McGrady as number 4 for the biggest what if for the Raptors.
I mean, it's an interesting pick because, and honestly, the comparison to McGrady and James Harden, I actually hadn't thought about. I hadn't made that comparison personally. In terms of McGrady on the Raptors at that point and Harden on OKC at that point, I think there might be a comparison in terms of maybe both the Raptors and OKC not actually recognizing what they truly had in those players. And then I could be wrong, but maybe, Harden Houston Harden and OKC Harden were, two different Hardens. And I feel like if OKC knew Harden was that good, that maybe they would have just paid him, right? Like they didn't want to pay him what they paid KD and Westbrook. And I feel like in Toronto's case, if they knew that McGrady was going to be Orlando McGrady, I feel like he would have been starting from the beginning of the year, and they would have been doing whatever they could to try to please him, right? And not sort of annoy him or treat him with, we're going to keep you on the bench for now and stuff like that. I feel like they would have done more if they knew, like, whoa, wait a minute, this guy potentially could be even better than Vince, right? I don't think there's any way that people knew that. But anyway, I digress. I know McGree's going to come up later in this topic, so I'll leave it there, and I'll just move to what I had as the top 4 Raptors what if. I had actually what Emmanuel had as his number 5. I had the Raptors not being able to draft Allen Iverson. I feel like that was a huge what if for the Raptors because like he had already said, like if we win that draft lottery, if they let us pick Allen Iverson, who knows what the Raptors roster and what our franchise looks like. Now, this is ignoring the fact of, okay, people didn't want to play in Canada at that point, and maybe Allen Iverson doesn't stay. I'm going to ignore all that. And I'm going to assume, okay, let's say he does stay, right? Wow, what now do we look like with Allen Iverson running the show? What do we look like with Allen Iverson and Damon Stoudemire together? Or do we package Damon Stoudemire for something else and then just have Allen Iverson and then another talent that comes in? I mean, the possibilities are endless. And then sometimes I even think, okay, if we were still in a position to draft Vince in 98 and pair him with Allen Iverson, now what does that look like? Now that whole 2001 Classic Series doesn't exist because Vince and Iverson now are both on the Raptors. But anyway, that's what I had as my number 4.
That's good. The only pushback, even though the reason why I didn't have it higher is because I just assumed that Iverson would be gone by the time Vince came around. I just assumed that because that was the trend pre-Vince, right? Pre-Vince, nobody wanted to stay for whatever reason. It was cold, the taxes, whatever, and they wanted to leave. So I just felt like a guy like Allen Iverson who had a posse. Like, remember, Allen Iverson was like anti-establishment, like the cornrows, the braids, the tats, like coming out of the Michael Jordan wearing all suits and looking all proper. Iverson came in with the baggy pants, the do-rag, like the look that everybody's like, oh, yo, this guy's different. He represents the streets. And so he was like anti-establishment, like anti-conform. So somebody like that being sent to Canada, when for them, Canada might as well have been Russia. At that time period, I just don't know if he stays around in 97, 98 to 99. I don't know before he starts grumbling about, oh, I'm not happy, I'm this, I'm that. I don't know. I could be wrong. Like, we forget that Vince Carter was a certain type of superstar personality, for good and for bad. But he had a lot of like alpha about him, even though he had alpha talent, right? So him coming to Toronto, it was okay. He's like, hey, they like me here, I like it. It was good until it wasn't, right? Where a lot of people before that didn't even want to give Toronto a chance. So I think Vince was a perfect guy that we got. He gave us legitimacy. I don't know, even though Iverson was a better player, I don't know if Iverson would have done the same. That's the only reason I've been to put Iverson higher.
Thanks so much for tuning in. Stay tuned for our next video where we discuss our picks for the 3rd biggest what if in Toronto Raptors history.